On March 4th, 1959, Pioneer 4 passed the moon to take photos. The public was told that there was a glitch and no photos were taken. However, according to some people, that was a lie. Not only were photos taken, but get this, the photos revealed a hidden alien base on the backside of the moon. Throughout history, Americans have taken great pride in being first. The first to create the light bulb, the first to fly, and of course, the first to put a man on the moon. But why did we go to the moon in the first place? Was there perhaps a hidden agenda that was never revealed to the American public? In this video, we're going to explore the crazy idea that there just might be an extraterrestrial base hidden on the moon. To do this, we'll explore some strange statements about aliens that were made by Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. Then, we'll share how a United States Air Force sergeant who was specializing in electronic photography actually came forward and stated that he personally saw images that the government had of intelligently built structures on the backside of the moon. And finally, we'll share the experience of a man named Terry Lovelace. He claims that he was an abductee who was taken to an alien spacecraft that was positioned on the other side of the moon, and while there, he saw with his own two eyes that there really is an alien base on the backside of the moon. So, this report begins in September of 1962. In one of the most motivational speeches in all of American history, JFK energized the American public into supporting the idea of putting a man on the moon.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Kennedy made that speech on September 12, 1962, and maybe it really was that American drive to be first, to explore new territories, to go where no one has gone before. Or maybe we saw something in those images that weren't taken by NASA's Pioneer 4 in 1959, and the American government got nervous. Not long after the 1959 glitch of Pioneer 4, where we failed to get those photographs, for some reason, NASA began sending scores of probes so that they could get a better look at the moon. This endeavor lasted all through the first half of the 1960s. By the middle of June 1966, NASA had amassed tons of information about the moon. And then, of course, on July 20th, 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first two people to walk on another world.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
America had gained yet another first. Did you know that Buzz Aldrin claimed that he had a strange experience on the way to the moon?
I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough not to say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. So technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object.
So what does that mean? The astronauts were being followed on the way to the moon? Followed by who? Why? Now, to be fair, Aldrin didn't say that some alien spacecraft was following them. But space is huge, and it's dark. If the astronauts were close enough where Aldrin could see an object moving in relationship to the stars, well, it seems quite reasonable that something otherworldly and intelligent was indeed following them. In the documentary Aliens on the Moon, The Truth Exposed, Ken Johnson, the man who helped train the astronauts to fly the lunar module, said this.
Back at the Johnson Space Center, during a couple minutes of broken communication, Neil switched over to the medical channel to speak directly with the chief medical officer of the mission. He said, "They're here. They're parked around the rim of the crater, and they're watching us."
They're here? They're watching us? Who was watching them? So let's just break this down. In 1959, NASA sends Pioneer 4 to pass the moon with its chief purpose of being to photograph the moon, something that it completely fails to do. Then, for the next several years, NASA sends an army of rockets to get thousands of data points of the moon. And all the while, Kennedy is rallying the American public with one of the most motivational campaigns in all of American history. All of history, for that matter, trying to convince everyone that the most important thing to do right now is to put a man on the moon. Then, during that first trip, Aldrin sees a UFO following the rocket. And then lastly, while the astronauts are on the surface of the moon, Armstrong switches his radio frequency away from the main channel and then privately says that they're watching us. They're here. Maybe there was a larger hidden reason that we sent men to the moon. One hot day in the summer of 1965, while NASA was still moving toward their famous Apollo 11 moon landing, United States Air Force Sergeant Karl Wolfe, an electronics photograph repairman with a top-secret clearance, was approached by his supervisor, Staff Sergeant Taylor. Taylor told him that the NSA, the National Security Agency who controlled a restricted area there on the base where Karl worked, was having some trouble with a piece of equipment and they needed it repaired. Now, I'm sure that most of you know this, but if you don't, there are several levels of clearance above top secret, and even though Karl had top secret clearance, it wasn't high enough to even allow him into the outer offices of the NSA building. Well, Karl reminded his boss of this, and his boss took a moment to think about it. Then he nodded his head and said, "Yeah, but this is a very unique situation." See, the NSA was bottlenecked. They were at a critical moment when VIPs were there on the base, and there was this photographic electronic machine that had failed. Well, the NSA needed it working as soon as possible, and Karl just so happened to be the only person on the base at the moment who had any idea of how to fix this thing. Staff Sergeant Taylor said that it was so important, in fact, that Karl's clearance was being raised as they spoke. Now, my dad was in the military, and so were his brothers, my uncles. But I never was, so I have no idea. I wonder what exactly does one have to do in order to have his security clearance raised? Well, whatever it was, Karl didn't have to do it. That's how important it was to them to get this machine fixed. Well, this gave Wolfe anxiety. Having an ultra-high security clearance sounds good, right? And I suppose if one's working toward getting it, it probably is. But if not, well, I imagine that it could be a scary thing. The more one knows about highly sensitive information, the more of a liability that person can be, right? Karl knew this, and he wasn't sure that he even wanted to enter the building, much less repair a machine that could potentially have classified photographic information in it. But he also knew that this wasn't a request, and he didn't exactly have a choice. Even before his boss was able to finish explaining the situation to him and leave the room, the phone rang. And he was notified that his security clearance had indeed been enhanced. Well, moments later, he was given a chaperone, and then he was escorted into the restricted building. He said that his excitement grew and his awareness heightened as he was taken into the outer offices. This was the one building on the base that he had never been inside before. He said that it was both exciting and scary. His journey was momentarily halted in the outer offices as his chaperone announced their arrival. Well, after a phone call and a few paper shuffles, he was taken through a doorway and then led down a long hall. At the end of the hall, he was weaved around desks and partitions toward more sensitive areas. His heart raced faster and faster as he and his chaperone entered the forbidden laboratory at the very center of the building. Inside, he was instantly confused. This area looked nothing like an American military base. He said that he saw scientists and other personnel wearing name tags from every country of the world, and they were all working together. And he said that the buzz in the air was different also. He said that it was alive with focused excitement and quiet expectation. Everyone was working as if they had just made the discovery of a lifetime. Well, at that point, he paused, dumbfounded, as he just looked around and then was somewhat forcibly nudged forward by his escort. This, of course, snapped him back into reality, and he followed the direction of his escort as he was taken through the laboratory into a very dark room that was only lighted by a red security light. As his eyes adjusted, a person and several pieces of equipment etched themselves out of the darkness. Then he was shown the troublesome piece of equipment that had failed, and he was commanded to repair it right away. Well, he told his escort that he couldn't make the repairs in the dark and said that the machine would have to be moved to a better lighted area. The chaperone understood, and surprisingly, he left the room for a moment to make the arrangements. Now, at this point, Karl was in this highly sensitive area without a chaperone. Both his excitement and his anxiety grew. He wasn't there alone, though. There was another person with him. As he waited for his chaperone to return, the two men struck up a conversation. Karl mentioned that he was interested and fascinated at how the data got from the lunar orbiter to the laboratory, which of course in itself is not classified information, and it's permissible to talk about. So the other man showed excitement and then started explaining the process. Well, several minutes into it, the young man's breathing changed. He lowered his voice and he got real serious. And he said, "By the way, did you know we discovered a base on the backside of the moon?" Now, that's not something that one hears every day. Still, stating that there is an alien base on the moon, that's an extraordinary claim. And extraordinary claims really do require extraordinary proof. And that's exactly what the young man produced. As he was speaking, he pulled out a slew of photographs and he laid them down one at a time in front of Karl. Well, by this time, Karl's eyes had fully adjusted to the darkness, and he could clearly see that these photographs depicted intelligently created structures on the lunar surface. He later said that there were mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, towers, and other formations. As he looked at these photographs, Karl's anxiety went through the roof. He knew that this was the highest breach of security, and the government would stop at nothing to contain this type of a breach. If it were discovered that he had been exposed to this information, well, there was a good chance that he wouldn't even see tomorrow. So realizing this, he tore his eyes away from the photographs and he completely withdrew from the conversation. And not a moment too soon either. Just a second later, as the other man was putting away these photographs, another person entered the room, and Karl was sure that that person could feel the hush-hush between the two men. After that, well, it seemed like forever until his chaperone returned, and he sweated bullets every second that passed, not really sure what was going to happen next. Eventually, the piece of equipment was moved, and Karl made the repairs. On May 9th, 2001, Karl Wolfe came forward and he spoke at the National Press Club news conference in Washington, D.C. There, he shared this experience, and he stated that he was willing to testify under oath before Congress that every word of his story was true. Until the very day that he died in 2018, Congress never did ask him to testify. It's one thing to see pictures of structures on the moon, but it's an entirely different level to see those structures in person with your own two eyes. Terry Lovelace is a man who claims that he's been abducted by extraterrestrials his entire life. During one of his abductions, he claims that he was taken to a huge spaceship which was positioned on the other side of the moon. And at one point, while he was there, he was able to see the surface of the backside of the moon. So we got a hold of Terry, and we asked him if he would share with us what he saw.
Hi, welcome to True Stories Only. My name is Terry Lovelace. I want to tell you today that there is a base on the far side of the moon, on the dark side of the moon. It never faces the Earth. And it is populated, and there is a city there. And when I saw it from an alien spacecraft, it looked to be the size of LAX, and it was like LAX lit up at night. Maybe not quite so large, but it's big and it's real.
The information in this report is insane. So what exactly is the truth? Well, Pioneer 4 really did pass the moon on March 4th, 1959. But as to whether or not it really failed to get pictures is something that only the government knows. The official statement is that a light-sensitive triggering mechanism failed, and no pictures were taken. See, during takeoff, one of the rockets burned for just a second too long, and this caused the spacecraft's trajectory to change. Well, that 1 second extra burn caused the ship to pass by the moon at a distance that was far too great for the imaging scanner to pick up the moon's light, and therefore the cameras weren't triggered. Now, that sounds like a plausible explanation to me. Maybe the government's telling the truth. But of course, on the other hand, if there really is an alien base on the backside of the moon and Pioneer 4 got pictures of it, do you think that the government would have actually shown those pictures to the American people? And if they didn't, well, wouldn't they have to say that something went wrong? Like maybe it failed to get pictures? Which, of course, is exactly what they did. And what about Karl Wolfe's statement about seeing photographs of buildings on the moon? As far as we can tell, everything about his story checks out. Amy did some digging, and he was working at Langley Air Force Base as an electronics photograph repairman in the summer of 1965, and the NSA did have a facility there at the same time. If a photograph imaging machine did in fact break down, well, Wolfe would have been more than qualified to fix it. I personally watched the testimony that Wolfe gave on March 9th in Washington, D.C., and he seemed pretty sincere to me. And it doesn't appear that he had anything to gain and everything to lose by coming forward. Why would someone come forward 30 years after an incident and swear that that incident was 100% true, even though by doing so, that person could get into a lot of trouble, and then even go so far as to state that he would be willing to testify under oath to Congress? And what about Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong's statements that they saw aliens following them and then watching them on the surface of the moon? It's all a bit much, and I personally don't know what to think. What do you make of all of it? Are all of the people in this report just lying? Maybe, but it does make you wonder though, doesn't it? And speaking of wondering, if you enjoy watching videos like this, videos that do make you wonder, then please help us build this channel. Subscribe, hit the bell for all notifications, like this video, comment, and please share it with all of your friends. Thank you.